The story of how the Cold War began is unknown to many people. The triumphant victory of the Allies over Germany and Hitler's Nazi regime in the spring of 1945 was a triumphant event in US and world history, setting the stage for a new war, the Cold War. It took almost 3.5 years of heavy fighting to triumph over the Nazis. The Potsdam Proclamation on July 26, 1945, which ultimately ended the fighting in Europe, signaled the start of this tragic Cold War. The liberation of Nazi concentration camps all over Europe provided visual evidence of Nazi brutality. Some 6 million Jews and millions of Christians, Gypsies, Poles, Germans, and others died in concentration death camps such as Auschwitz. The many culprits involved in these horrid war crimes and the deaths of so many innocent people were Hitler's highest-ranking officials. The Nuremberg trials called them to account beginning in October of 1945. These trials were a series of prosecutions of Nazi war criminals who were unable to flee Germany after the war ended.
21 Nazis are to hear their fate. The Nazi hierarchy is there to answer for 10 years of plotting, for the whole program of pillage and murder. Now it is civilization's turn to read their monstrous crimes into the record.
Crimes against humanity, namely murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, and other inhumane acts committed against any civilian population before or during the war.
This is what awaits Goering, Keitel, Rosenberg, and the other apostles of death and hate. The only conceivable end.
The trials ended in 1946, and although many of the most notorious Nazis were prosecuted and punished, many other men who wore the Nazi swastika were tragically recruited to work in the borders of and with the United States of America. In 1998, Congress passed the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act. The act led to the release of thousands of declassified CIA documents to the public.
Too much has been kept secret for too long. Crimes that were committed during that conflagration, and also facts about the fate of the perpetrators of Nazi crimes ought to be known by the world.
The documents and a detailed report released in 2002 have revealed that many former Nazis were hired to work for the United States in order to exploit their techniques in intelligence gathering and weapons development. As World War II ended, distrust of the Soviet Union was building in the United States. A need for intelligence about the Soviets was enough reason for the United States Office of Strategic Services, which later became the Central Intelligence Agency in 1947, to knowingly hire these Nazis.
Both the United States and the Soviet Union were victorious in World War II, were very strong militarily, and had very large geopolitical interests in Europe.
Reinhard Gehlen was Hitler's top anti-communist spy, and Hitler found him to be of great use in acquiring intelligence about the Soviet Union. Gehlen was able to acquire vast amounts of information about the Soviets, including intelligence about the KGB, resources, and the condition of the Russian army. As time passed, Gehlen felt that Hitler was becoming consumed with world domination, and watched as the Führer turned into an obsessed ruler who needed to be removed from power. Gehlen played a minor role in the July 20th plot during 1944, and when Hitler survived the assassination attempt, his role was covered up. Though Gehlen wanted Hitler dead, he still believed in opposition to communism and fighting for the Nazi cause. Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, was a Nazi war criminal who was responsible for the deaths of at least 4,000 Jews. An SS intelligence officer responsible for the transport of many orphans to Auschwitz, his horrific behavior was of no interest to the CIC. With the help of Gehlen, he became skilled in intelligence, and he briefly gathered information on the Soviets. During September 1946, U.S. intelligence agencies were more concerned with Nazi scientists who had created weapons of destruction for Nazi Germany, and they were determined to utilize them throughout the Cold War, working against the Soviet Union.
There were a total of 100 of the rocket group, and they did just about everything in terms of scientific work.
The Nazi scientist relocation project was dubbed Operation Paperclip. The United States believed that if the Nazi scientists were left in Germany, capture them and use them against the U.S. Arthur Rudolph was the director of the metalwork factory at the Dort-Nordhausen concentration camps during World War II. As part of Operation Paperclip, Rudolph, a former Nazi rocket engineer, and many other prominent Nazi scientists who were some of the brightest minds in Nazi Germany were recruited by the CIC. Arthur Rudolph's techniques in rocket development, both as a weapon and an advancement in space exploration, was disregarded as his career advanced. He was able to earn U.S. citizenship and later designed the Saturn V rocket used in the Apollo moon landings in 1969. His contributions to American space exploration tragically helped to lengthen the U.S.-Soviet space race. Reinhard Gehlen once stated that, early in 1944, I told my more intimate colleagues that I consider the war lost and we must begin thinking of the future and plan for the approaching catastrophe. He knew that he must be captured by the Americans in order to achieve his goal to work as a spy and reveal his valuable Russian files. In April of 1945, he packed up his files, loaded them on trucks, and the convoy set out through the eastern part of Germany, heading to Switzerland where he would soon meet the Americans. Eventually, Reinhard Gehlen was captured and interrogated by U.S. Captain John Bokor. They forged an alliance that lasted for decades, and Bokor tragically removed Gehlen from the list of war criminals to be prosecuted.
He wanted to build a German intelligence institution. He saw the partnership with the United States as a symbiotic or mutually beneficial relationship that would allow him to, first of all, keep alive his associates from the general staff in Hitler's army, and also to build his own credibility as a national security specialist in post-war Germany.
For Reinhard Gehlen, working with the Americans was far more attractive than spending the rest of his life in prison, and as bargaining tool, the records set him free. His plan upon capture was to approach the United States, reveal his identity, and continue working as an expert in gathering intelligence about the Soviets, but this time for the Americans. CIA Operations Officer James Critchfield's main objective was to establish a relationship between the former Nazis and the CIA. He worked with Reinhard Gehlen to create Gehlenorg, believing that it was imperative for the safety of the United States to employ these Cold Warriors. U.S. General William Joseph Donovan, a head of the OSS, and Allen Dulles, the OSS station chief, also had significant roles in helping the Nazis come to the United States. This was a shady business deal, tragically compromising American values after the triumph of winning World War II. Gehlen and his Nazi colleagues created the international spy network known as Gehlenorg, and it was essentially the eyes and ears of the newly created CIA in Western Germany. Gehlen began his work in the summer of 1946 with his first goal, to build up his spy organization and continue spying on the Soviets on behalf of the Americans. In order to justify his job as main CIA intelligence gatherer in Europe, Gehlen needed to maintain the Soviet Union as a credible threat against the United States. In documents, he falsified facts and information about the power and weapons of the Soviet Union, some of which made their way to the desk of President Truman.
There's explicit documentation for erroneous information that he was the source of that resulted in a great deal of confusion in Washington with respect to what Soviet intentions were in Europe.
Both Project Paperclip and Gehlenorg are two of the most controversial and secretive projects of the mid-20th century. They fueled the fire of a Cold War that lasted decades and cost American taxpayers trillions of dollars. Following a triumphant World War II victory, it is a tragedy that the United States worked with a former enemy to fight a new rival. Eli Rosenbaum of the U.S. Justice Department once stated that, as a body, the real winners of the Cold War were Nazi war criminals, many of whom were able to escape justice.